Thank you, Antti, for the introduction and this invitation to be here, and also for this opportunity to talk a little bit about basic income and welfare state. And in my specific, I'm a little bit more focusing on poverty policy. So my marine work is on current social assistance scheme. I've done some qualitative and quantitative work, also in comparative perspective. So, and the current social assistance schemes in most of the countries are based on a means test. So only people without any other resources should be able to access this minimum income scheme. It should give them a certain level that they can live on. And of course, if you are employable in the current social assistance scheme, you have to make yourself available for work. So at least you have to go and look for some employment opportunities. So that's the basic thing. And I just want to go or start with this, more with this poverty perspective and social policy perspective. Pertti, the last time, did some work on this kind of effects on employment policy. And I'm now looking into what's this kind of state. Why is it interesting from a perspective to alleviate poverty, to give people a certain minimum that they can live? So first I give you some introduction. What is poverty and what are those kind of minimum income schemes? What are the current means testing in contemporary welfare state? What are the effects? Certain basics. And then I'm talking a little bit on these different perspectives of explanation of poverty, which are very ideologically discussed. So it's this kind of, in poverty policy and social policy, it's often that you don't have the strict division, that's social science and that's everyday politics, but you have this crossover threshold a lot of times. And of course it's also a little bit about the basic ideas. Where does poverty come from? What's this kind of structure that can explain this phenomenon? And then, as we are going to do some work on the three basic income proposals that you were supposed to read, or at least take a glimpse on them. They are very different. On the one hand, you have Charles Murray. On the other hand, you had Milton Friedman from another ideological perspective, and then finally a newer one from Eric Olin Wright, and it's another perspective. So you have three different basic income proposals and how they are situated in nowadays welfare states. And first, as I told you, I want to talk a little bit about poverty policy and social policy. And I think it's something that is nowadays very much a key concern in social policy. If you think about the development in the last 20, 30 years, it is back on the agenda. Some people say it's because of new social risk, changes in employment policy, in how people live, like single mothers, etc., etc. But poverty and social policy was always very much related. It has been long-term studies on how poverty exists and why poverty exists. And it's very much about how poor laws work within an industrial society. If you see, it is not a new phenomenon that people in an industrial society are poor, and how can one give them some certain minimum to live on it? How can we achieve that within the economic and social society we live in? Of course, it has to be seen as something that has to be accepted in the first step that it's not acceptable that people don't have any income or live on no income. It's not something that is kind of stable and fixed. It's very much about how people view a phenomenon, how to see and perceive inequality and low income people. If you take a look, sorry, there is something going on. If you take a look at the first studies that looked into this phenomenon of poor people and something, always this idea was that something has to be done, and that's the political side. If you look at the basic income, it's not only about why people are poor, it's also about the next step. How can we change it? How can we intervene on society? It's this kind of, you see and perceive something as not being just, fair, or kind of inequality you don't want to have, or kind of society doesn't work. Nowadays you say it's not socially coherent, for example. And then you have this acceptance that you need something to be done. And that's this kind of mingling of the academic and political discourse. So it's very, very important on what you see and perceive as poor and poverty. And then the next step is how you want to resolve the problem of poverty. And I think that's very important. And as you can see, there's a long tradition of definition and measurement of poverty. The first, of course, was Great Britain, because they experienced the industrialization in this first step. And I think it's this kind of new shift that you have to think it as really as academic and political debate that closely collaborate. And you can also see it in a second step, that you can't see it as something which is really like fixed and stable. That's something which is poor, and that's something which tells somebody is not poor. It's something that is up to the political and academic debate on how you see what is poor and what is not poor. So also the solutions very much differ on how much you want to redistribute and how and under which conditions you want to redistribute. And you can find all those differences not only about poverty and poor people, but you can also see those distinctions on basic income later on. And nowadays, of course, it's not only about this kind of minimum, absolute minimum, like $2 in some less developed countries, or the 60% threshold as the European Union argues. It's very much about this debate on social exclusion and deprivation, on the life chances of the next generation or the children of poor, and so on and so on. So it has been widened a little bit. It's not only about material resources and few minimum threshold, but it's also about how and why people can actually engage in society and fulfill a role within society as a kind of full member in society. If you see this very easy definition, it's being without the essentials of life. But of course, it very much depends in which society you are. What is the essential? What is the minimum you can live on? How can you be, or how are you able to live within a society? And then you had this little bit more advanced definition of Peter Townsend, for example, participate in all activities, living conditions and amenities. So it's a little broader. It also has this of active participation and inclusion already. It's not just about minimum resources. And of course, in nowadays debate, when you think about the European Union, for example, it's very much about being ranked as a country, how many percent of the populations are below or above the poverty threshold, etc., etc. And it's very much this kind of 60% median equivalized income that tells on how well a country is doing with redistribution. And you can see also, at least at the example of Austria, that the kind of try to push just the minimum income schemes a little bit every year. So not that many people get below that 60% median equivalized income, but they don't want to push it above that, because then the threshold itself is going to raise a lot. So it's also about how you work within those new boundaries. Sorry, I think I have some program that pops up. And I guess that's very much what's going on in these ideas of poverty, and that's very much about what minimum income programs are about, to alleviate the life of the people that are nowadays at the 60% risk of poverty threshold, that have low income. And it's something which is in most of the countries a kind of add-on. It's not the main program, it doesn't shift that much of money, that much of resources in the country, because most of it is dealt in security programs that are placed for those people in the workforce with the proper employment, with proper wages, etc., etc. And it's just for a minor program with lower redistributive forces. But it's very, very much important for people that rely on that program, of course, because then if they don't get that add on the top up, they end up in a very harsh condition if they don't get that money. And of course, if you look at those ideas on poverty, it's also very much related in those literature. It's about to see them placed in a society, to give them some position in society which doesn't give them the position of the lowest of the ranks, which puts them a little bit further up and lets them participate in society and progress in that sense. So it's also about that it has this idea that people should be able to participate fully in society, that they aren't classified as something else in the specific program, that aren't worth to be supported. If you look on contemporary social assistance schemes, very often they're classified as stigmatizing. Nobody likes to go to the welfare office. Nobody likes to apply for a benefit there. And in that sense, it's very much about this idea that you have a social assistance scheme which supports people that have low or no income. It shouldn't exclude themselves. It should make them become part of a society, contribute to society, be part of a society. At the same time, when you question people that go to the social assistance office, they feel very much stigmatized. It's not easy for them to apply because they know that that's the program for the poor people. Nobody likes to go there, and it's stigmatizing. So it's this kind of very much being in between. You get some money, but you're not feeling yourself as somebody, as a full included citizen. You're still put in a special position because you ask for social assistance and you're not in a regular program, social security program, or you're not within the employment system. So that's this kind of very, very distinctive role of social assistance schemes. They help, they alleviate poverty, but at the same time they put people on a special track so that they don't feel fully included. but conceptually they are designed as a program that should include people fully, that should reduce social exclusion, and should make them be and feel a full member of society. And of course, that's part of this critique in this kind of social assistance scheme and poverty policy. It's about, are they fully participatory? Are the capabilities of the people thought about? If you think about Amartya Sen, is it really like redistributing a lot? Is it really like does it have a redistributive impact? Is it putting people above the poverty threshold? I can't stop that. Sorry. Is it helping people also that they think about themselves as having a voice, something to say, and having some form of agency to build up their own life within their own definitions, or increases their agency to be able? And I guess those are very much things one has to think about current social assistance scheme, but it's also something one has to give a thought when one thinks about basic income schemes. How do they perceive the client themselves, this construction? Are they going to reinforce a distinction between basic income people and people in employment, for example, etc., etc.? Are they built in a way that people can see their capabilities flourishing? Do they give certain forms of agency and voice, etc., etc.? And are they able to participate in society, locally, nationally, etc., etc.? If you think, and I talked a little bit about those current minimum income schemes based on conditionality and means tested, they have been taking this critique as stigmatizing, constructing second-class citizenship for a long time. For example, Titmus has this perspective, and his main driving force to introduce and to foster the British system was to get rid of this perception of incomes testing being, in a way, humiliated, loss of status, dignity of self-respect. There should be a universal service, easily accessible, to feel this kind of being a regular citizen in society. And I think that was one of the main drivers for the British system to be established after the Second World War, to provide those universal services, that people have proper services that enable them to feel as proper citizens, that they are able to participate in civil society and also in the political sphere. And one of the main research done, for example, by Joel Soss, is telling you that people that are on a special track, either disability or social assistance scheme, that don't feel wanted by society, they don't want to contribute to society as well, they don't feel like enough status to engage on the local or regional level politically. And that's this kind of backlash that can come if you really enforce a two-tier scheme. To reduce discriminatory perspective, to reduce that perspective to see somebody as less deserving, as undeserving. So it's also very much on how you design a benefit, whether somebody feels as this, perceived as, in that logic, I'm a deserving person, or whether one has the status as undeserving person, of course. And I think that's a very important insight from those reforms in the 50s and 60s, that you want to see people or experience people themselves as somebody that is entitled, that is not discriminated, and has this experience of a good public service as well. That's kind of not attributing to second-class citizenship. If you look at means testing by itself, why is it still enforced? Why didn't we get rid of it? It's in place. It has been put in place for many more benefits, at least in Austria. There was this introduction of means test, a little means test there and there, not that universalism in the last year. Basically, it's because the welfare states have this problem of austerity. They are not allowed to spend more money. They have to cut down somehow, and it's very easy to do that with means testing. So it depends very much on how much income you have. Most of the time, it can also be on how much assets you have. So it can be that you're not entitled to a certain social assistance benefit. For example, if you have your own flat, then you can't apply for that benefit. And I think that's very much so. It, of course, depends on how high the threshold is. If you have an income threshold, you can have it on a very high level, so almost everybody is included, only the very rich are excluded, or on a very low threshold that you just reach like 2 or 3% of population. You can put a very tough means test. In Austria, for example, I was seeing certain social assistance office that went back on the bank account and sheets of people for 12 months to see whether there was any income going out and in a little bit higher, so they could kick out almost 50% of the applicants because somebody had some money coming in at one point, and then they thought that there are some resources somewhere hidden. Of course, the first targeted benefit lowers the costs. It's only those in need. And it's also part of a political problem very often, because people say, why should we support the rich with the benefit? So it's widely accepted in society as well, in that sense. Of course, cons are stigma. If you have a very tough means test, income tests, then middle classes won't receive that benefit. So why should middle class support a benefit when they don't get anything of that, because they can't get it? So it's also about, if you have this a very high, strict means test, you might exclude middle classes, and then they might not support that benefit, or they might, if there is something going on and welfare state has to do some austerity measures, they will be very much in agreement with those outsiders, because it's not going to touch their pockets, it's only going to touch the poor people's pocket. Of course, this redistribution aspect is very much on who pays, how much is going to be redistributed. If you look, for example, most social assistance schemes don't redistribute that much. They're highly debated, but the amount they redistribute compared to pension schemes, etc., is very low in most European countries. So it's really like so much quarrel about little money. The excess, of course, I'll talk a little bit more. The take-up rate, if you have a means test, the take-up rate is very low. A lot of people won't take it up because they don't think they're eligible. It's too much of a hassle, etc., etc. It's an administrative burden. You need to employ somebody that takes the check. In Finland, it's now a little bit eased with the social security scheme taking it over. And another argument which was added by more liberal is this poverty trap, or effective marginal tax rate. If you earn something, it's going to be deducted from the benefit. So if you just have a little bit of opportunity to earn extra, it doesn't make sense for you, because you're not going to get any better, because everything is going to be deducted from that. So, for example, if you have a minimum income benefit of 600 euros and you earn 50 euros and you go to the welfare office again, they're going to give you only 550 the next month, because that's going to be deducted from your benefit, of course, if you have no incentive otherwise. So that's why they have really been doing a lot of work on how to incentivize this tapering, etc., etc. So if you earn a little bit, not everything is going to be deducted. If you have a low income job, they try to be very, very calculative on how to optimize the scheme. If you look up the data on how many people take up the benefit, depending on the state, it's about 50 to 80%. So how tough is the scheme itself is a reason. So the design of the benefit, is it very complex and tricky regulations? You can't detect on yourself, I'm going to be entitled, I'm not going to be entitled, then it's less likely that someone applies. Is it up to the caseworker? Is it very much standardized? Is it the strict income and means test? Is it on top of other benefits? If you have some benefits already, you might not be interested because it just gives you another 50 euros. If it's your full benefit, if you don't have any income, you have to apply, etc., etc. Is it a very stigmatized group, a special benefit for a special group, or is it kind of a serving group, of course? Does it depend on the initiative of the person, or is it going to be delivered to it? Is it something that you get a nice letter? We noticed that you have only so much income the last year. Do you know about this benefit you can apply? Here is the form, and then you can just sign the form, send it back, and you will get the benefit. It's a different approach, then nobody informs you about that. And it's up to your own initiative to go in this last corner of the municipal building and apply for the benefit and wait for hours and hours. So it's very much different, of course, and that kicks into the administration. Is it service-oriented? Is it easily accessible? You don't have to take up a lot of documentation with you. They don't want that much. Is it a very tough procedure? Then how is the collaboration between administration, social security agency, tax office, so everything runs smoothly? You just have to do a signature. And of course, the behavior of entitled is very much as well. Fear of stigmatization, you don't have the information you need. You think about, you had some bad experience with bureaucracies before, you don't want to go there in another office. And of course, how long do you think yourself you're going to have? You need the benefit. How much you need the benefit, and so on and so on. So it's very much, but overall, if you think approximately half of the population that ought to get the benefit doesn't get the benefit, that's not a very good output or outcome for a welfare state. So if you involve means testing, it's a sure way to reduce the cost for the welfare state, because at least 20 up to 50% of the people entitled won't take it up. If you think about another aspect on how you can reduce people applying for a benefit, it's also about on how much conditionality you enforce. What do people have to do every month, every week to be re-entitled to a benefit? And nowadays, if you look at social assistance scheme, it's very much about workfare or activation. It's about getting more groups into the labor market. So it's also about those people that haven't been so much attention to get into employment in previous years. Now it's also very much about social assistance recipients, that they're required to engage in either waged work, participate in training or education, or take up job search, intensive job search. And most of the social assistance scheme nowadays transfer people that are classified as employable but not in work in the unemployment insurance scheme to the job centers, because they are more qualified in how to, and it's kind of easier for them, etc., etc. But it's also very much nowadays that if you are employable in all social assistance schemes all over Europe, you have to be at least willingly looking for a job at least once a month and in some application. And if you look up into different schemes, it was in the beginning in some countries, or it's this kind of two levels. There's this kind of high road where you think about people getting more education and training so that they're going to be able to end up in stable employment. Also in social assistance scheme you can still find that perspective, so that you think about the clients as having a severe lack in human capital, and that the need is boost to be able to get into employment for a longer period in a stable job and out of the welfare system. On the other hand, very much nowadays, social assistance scheme is also about getting people out of the scheme as soon as possible, out of the welfare scheme. And in that way, it's about that people should take up any job that they might fit. So it's work first. And that can be seen as very conditional and disciplining and giving a lot of negative aspects as well. And one thing, if one looks at this low road, of course, it fosters a high pressure on low-income jobs, because it's going to be a little bit more tense of competition. People are taking up jobs that they don't want to do, and so on. And so it's not like something to build up a stable position in the labor market, but to just get on the next job available. If you look in reality in the social assistance schemes, you can find that they try to do both roads. And depending on the resources and the job markets, they either focus a little bit more on the high or low road. So it's a mixture nowadays as well. But so you have on the one side the means test and the conditionality. And if you enforce more conditionality, higher conditionality, of course some people will drop off the benefit as well, because they're sanctioned. In Austria you have sanction rates of 7%. So out of 107 people are sanctioned each year because they don't comply. Of course you have people that know I'm not going to be able to comply, so they don't reapply for the benefit in the next month, for example. So, and if you think of a very strict system, somebody with some income might not apply for this scheme at all, because the conditionality is enforced so strictly and don't want to deal with that. So it's also a way about regulating the influx and pushing people off the welfare without them being re-employed as well. With sanctions, with disciplining measures, people might not obtain a benefit despite not being in employment at all. So it's a very, very slippery slope, and conditionality and means test is both a good way of reducing people on welfare. Have you seen that before? No. But that's this kind of basic graph on distributional effects of different social security schemes. If you provide with the universal benefit, in the end, people that have higher income will pay more because they're taxed higher than people on lower income because they will get the universal benefits in return. So the taxes is going to be lowered. If you do it with the means test, you end up with the basic system as well. You also have a group that will get more than the pay-in in taxes, and you will have a group that pays in more, despite and not getting any means-tested benefits at all. The one thing that might be different is the average spending on welfare of the welfare state, if you have universal services. So this kind of how many percent of the gross domestic national product is spent on welfare is going to increase if you have universal. And that's very much of a problem for nowadays welfare states because they're restricted with this, I think, thought that everything above 30% is too much to be sustainable for a good economic growth. But now I just want to touch those 4 explanations of poverty, as you can see here, because it also explains you a lot on how you construct your basic income in the end, how you perceive poor people, how you perceive a welfare state is very much related also on how you construct your basic income support scheme in the end. And poverty is seen very different. If you have this very strict right-wing perspective, you think that it's the fault of the individual. His or her behavior is driven in the wrong way because, and I can't close it, sorry, I can't. Any welfare system is supporting the individual to take up a pathological stance because they know it's better to be on benefits than to be hardworking or caring for your family members, in this perspective of Charles Murray. This conservative perspective is more on this culture of dependency. It's a little bit seen that the society fosters a certain welfare dependency, and one has to re-educate the individual and society towards more conservative value, towards this work ethic again. On the social democratic, is poverty seen as a fault of government? The institutions cannot handle rightfully with employment and redistribution, and something goes wrong in the scheme, so we have to change a little bit more and redistribute more. And then the socialist perspective, communist perspective, very much focuses it's part of capitalism, and to change it, poverty, you have to change the economic system in total. Then you can get rid of poverty. If you see that right-wing and behavioral and pathological perspective, you very much end up with Charles Murray, and he was very renounced, not very positively in my perspective, with his underclass debate that struck the UK in the 1980s, 1986, I guess. And it was this to get rid of the entire federal welfare and income support structure for working age persons. This kind of benefits just let people behave as rational agents and that try not to do anything and just get the benefits. So if you get rid of the welfare system, the poor are going to move on from this state of laziness and go back into work and start to be self-responsible. Again, they will take care of the family, they don't want to have any single parenthood anymore, etc., etc. Then he really went off board later on, also with this biological explanations, so if you want to read that. It's very much related also to this perspective that you have for a long period in socio-economic thinking of the small twos, that the wrong people in a society get children and then it's going to be overpopulated and so on, and it's going to reduce the welfare of a state and you need to rearrange that. Of course it doesn't take into account any structural explanation or change of labor markets, for example, in the US and the UK. It's only, and of course, if inferior genes, I think it was very much too much. Conservative is Mead. Another scholar was very much taking it that it was this workfare program stemmed from his ideas that you have to reintroduce people to this ethic of work and introduce these rights and obligation. You can nowadays find that also in social democratic thinking, this kind of, with Tony Blair, very much gained mainstream, this culture of return and the responsibility, but some support of the state. So it's not like Charles Murray, get rid of the welfare state, it's the welfare state has to be redesigned in a way that people get back on the right behavior and track. Of course, it was very much also about a negative perception of poor people as othering, laziness, lack of work ethic, etc., etc. If you look at the social democratic critique of poverty or why poverty exists, is that it has this perspective that the institutional design on poverty policy doesn't work, and you need to have and to define the welfare state within the current economic system, within the capitalist system, in a way that it again reaches the poor people and is set up in a way that it reduces poverty, so it redistributes enough money towards the poor, so change a little bit, and so on, and so on. But it's not about like the system of more socialist, egalitarian system, that you really want to change the economic system, because you see poverty exists, that it functions for the capitalist system, so that the reserve army of labor, poor workers, provide some economic resource in periods of economic growth, so they can re-enter the labor market, and you give them just the minimum support when the labor market is tough and the economic decline. And it's also something where you can discipline all the others, that they really work hard, because they fear that otherwise they might end up in poverty, so that they obey to this capitalist regime and be real good workers with a high work ethic. So you have those two perspectives. And in that perspective, for example, Peter Cloud said, you can really see sometimes social assistance scheme is giving something because they fear there's going to be an uprising, some revolutionary accounts, and on other periods they're trying to enforce work obligation harder. Depends on economic and social conditions, political conditions. It's in that way, and in that thinking, it's also a way to subordinate workers and poor people. A way that the system, the capitalist system, can be more effective in exploiting people with meager wages. If you can look at the different basic income perspectives, I think you have seen that before, haven't you? No? That's from Fanteris, from one of his books. It's about how new schemes are kind of created. That's the classic, the social assistance scheme, the means-tested schemes where you're obliged to work. That's this kind of poverty schemes you have nowadays, minimum. Then you have the earned income tax, working tax credits. You have very much in the UK and US. If you are in employment and on low wage, the state will give you some add-on over the tax system. So you file your tax sheet at the end of the year, and then you will get something because you have earned so little. But you have to be employed, of course, in that sense. The negative incomes, that's text of Milton Friedman, is a little bit different because you don't have to be employed, so even with no income you're entitled to the negative, but it's distributed via the tax system and not via the welfare system. The unconditional basic income is like the straightforward, no means test and no conditions to work, so it very much depends on how much you get. And the participatory income is another form where you have to do something in return to society, like work for a small organization for a few hours, etc. So it's not unconditional fully in that sense.